Hi, this is Jan Spencer coming to you from Eugene, Oregon. I'd like to share with you some thoughts about reimagining our neighborhoods. This presentation is the second of a three-part series, Reimagining the Neighborhood. The ideal of this series of presentations is to encourage picking up the pace for social, political, and economic transformation towards a society that lives within the boundaries of the natural world, an economic system that is honest, accountable, and serves the healthy goals of society, and the restoration of the natural world. Why are we here? From what I see, I have to believe the needs of capitalism and the consumer culture are at odds with the well-being of people and planet. Take your pick of the problems of capitalism that are baked into the economic system, the concentration of political economic wealth. The wealthiest 20% own something like 80% of the value of the nation. Affluence exports its problems to other parts of the world. We have climate change. Pollution is an external cost. These are just a few of the reasons why I'm here. We've seen statistics suggesting that perhaps if the entire world were to try to live like the average American, we would need something like 5 planets to produce the raw materials and the energy, and importantly, to clean up the mess. Whether it's 5 planets, 3 planets, 10 planets. I've traveled a good deal all over the world, and I know from my own experience that the average American consumes far more resources, even then more so than wealthy countries in Europe like Germany or France or Italy. What would be some of the attributes of an ideal society? As mentioned, it would exist within the environmental boundaries of the natural world. The ideal society would bring out the best in positive human potential. It would embrace economic and political democracy, and it would restore, repair the natural world. A set of ideals I like a lot are the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions. Almost all the great traditions of the world share these ideals: care for the natural world, modesty of lifestyle, service to the community, personal and society uplift, and being responsible for our own actions. These are wonderful values and ideals to base a society and an economic system upon. So one early point of departure action that is called for is reducing our ecological footprints. Again, would the world require 5 planets to live like the average American? The evidence is that we need to be using a lot less, reducing our ecological footprints. This image here is the beginning of an ecological footprint calculator. You can find this online, footprintcalculator.org, and it asks you questions about your lifestyle. And at the end, it will tell you how many planet Earths would be required for everybody in the world to live like you. Whether this is completely accurate, it's debatable, but it certainly gives one a good idea of what they might do in their own lives. And here's another important part of taking action on behalf of a preferred future. what do we do with our own time and money? That's a huge issue. We can invest our time and money into the types of products and services and actions that help bring about a preferred future. The consumer culture certainly has other ideas. It's very seductive. And when the average person is on the receiving end of 500, 1,000 commercial messages every day, that is a lot of pressure to distract and continue what we're already doing. And we need alternatives. This small chart right here, comparing the consumer culture and what might a more sustainable culture look like. I have the left-hand column and the right-hand column comparing the now and what that activity, that attribute might look like in a culture that lives more within its environmental boundaries. When you're looking at this presentation on YouTube, you can pause here and you can take a look and you can think, what could I add to this list right here? This is a Google view of part of my neighborhood. And up here, this yellow rectangle is my own personal 1/4 acre suburban property. And these fuchsia colored rectangles, these are other properties nearby that are also permaculture friendly. So let's just take a short look at some of the historical photos of River Road here in my neighborhood. We go back maybe about 20 years when we first began to realize, you know, here in River Road, we do have something going on. We developed a little bit of an identity of permaculture and taking actions. A small but appreciable number of people are taking these kinds of actions. The early going here, building a wonderful straw bale structure at Darmalaya. There was a program called Community Transformations that brought a lot of young people to the neighborhood to learn about important living skills. We had site tours showing people from all over the country what we're doing to suburbia here. This early picture, the restoration of the Filbert Grove. This was a suburban CSA, the Visit to Amazing Acre, and a cob oven, another home nearby, big garden, Mark's Place, a whole acre that he's in the act of transforming. A public event, River Road Rocks, at our recreation center, the Filbert Grove. This property here had a big U-shaped driveway that took up half of the front yard. It's a big property. And this shows a big front yard garden. It used to be all grassy. We've had permaculture events in the neighborhood, work parties in the Filbert Grove. We did a presentation for the Neighborhoods USA conference. Lots of good outreach. We have important information to share. This picture shows the our neighborhood association outreach at a public event. Here, one of my neighbors is doing a show and tell of her place, wonderful suburban location. This was a work party at a park down the street. We help look after the park so the city doesn't use herbicides in the park. Another location, a site tour, Site Tours, Heiko is showing his front yard food forest. This picture here at Razor Park, a work party to restore that 5-acre public space, replanting a lot of natives at Razor Park. Certainly one of the most memorable events we had in the neighborhood was we hosted the 2015 Northwest Permaculture Convergence at our neighborhood recreation center. Of course, the rec center is a community center, and has meeting spaces and facilities. We used the rec center the whole weekend to host the Northwest Permaculture Convergence. People came from all over the Northwest, and we had workshops, we had site tours, we had a big expo, we had big fun out in the park. This picture here shows registration. We estimate something like 700 people participated in the convergence one way or another. A lot of the convergence was free. And I really like this picture here of Friends, small space, almost all recycled materials. This is all very low cost. My friend put a good deal of her time and a modest amount of money into creating this really wonderful, nice little passive solar space in her backyard. This is a graphic. I'll show a few pictures of my own home. This is a 1/4 acre property. To the right is the north, to the left is the south. I've got a lot going on here. This is what the front yard looked like when I moved in 20 years ago. I bought the place, and the intention from the start was to do a permaculture makeover. This is what the front yard looks like during the summertime now. This is all grapes, blackberries, Marion berries, lots of edible landscaping. Early on, I took out the driveway. This, where you see right here, this is the same place. I took out the driveway, and I have food growing where I used to park cars. This is actually some pictures of taking out the driveway. Cars take up too much space. Another important early action was to turn the garage into a living space. Again, this was a habitation for a car. I can make better use of that property. This makes my house a 3-bedroom house instead of a 2-bedroom house. It's been a good investment because I rent rooms in my house. That's an important part of my own income. This picture, this is what my backyard looked like when I moved in, just a grassy backyard. And this is what the backyard looks like in the summertime. You can see solar hot water collectors here. This was a south-facing patio that's been closed in and turned into a passive solar space. Galvalume metal roof for catching rainwater. I built this 400 square foot structure about 12 or 13 years ago. This is where I live. And what a nice walkway out to my space. I still use the house, but this is a little preview of a preferred future. I feel like to some degree, I spend a bit of my time in the future. This could be a common condition. Almost any suburban property has a lot of potential for taking care of more basic needs on site, and importantly, to be more aesthetically attractive. If we live in attractive, affirmative, positive places, that has to affect our own behavior too. Another picture of my space. This window you see here, this is actually where I'm sitting right now. Bit of a greenhouse. I have an irrigation system with my rainwater. This is my rainwater catchment system here. 6,500 gallons, good for preparedness. Another real benefit for doing all this work on my property is that I've had literally thousands of people visit over the years, all kinds of school groups, ecotourism, neighbors, permaculture site tours. Thousands of people have visited here, and I know a lot of people have made use of what they've learned here in their own lives and on their own properties too. And I know that there are people making these kinds of changes to their homes here and there all over the country. It's really exciting. We should all be sharing what we're learning with our neighbors. Okay, let's shift here into more of the realm of what are some of the possible actions that we can take moving into the future. This is a little bit of a wish list. Some of these items I touch on happening to some degree. Some of them, they are theoretical, but when we see some of the earlier historical pictures of my neighborhood, it's almost like some of those actions are a practice session for what we need to be doing a lot more of moving into the future. So one of the most important actions we've taken over the years is to have site tours, and we go visit properties, and the owner, the person doing the work on that property, explains to us what they're doing. They are sharing what they're learning so the participants can make use of that information. This is one particular site tour. The park down the street, my next door neighbor, Heiko's. This particular tour, we had 40 or 50 people. Nick's house over here. So we need to be very open to sharing what we're learning, not to be shy. This picture here shows this hedge was on the property line between me and my neighbor, and both my neighbor and I agreed we wanted to take the hedge out and replace the hedge with edible landscaping, and that's what we did. We couldn't do that on our own because the hedge was right on the property line. So it took two of us working together. And this is Bill, the same neighbor. We took out the hedge. He took out his driveway. He had a gravel driveway, and it occupied the best place on his property to have a garden. So he had a bobcat come in and take out the gravel driveway and replaced it with manufactured organic soil. And this is the same location that's next door. Another important location in the neighborhood is Dharmalaya. Mentioned earlier, the straw bale under construction. This has been a wonderful asset and amenity to the neighborhood because we've had all kinds of events, educational sessions, celebrations. This picture here shows a dinner we hosted for out-of-town visitors who came to Eugene's 2013 Neighborhoods USA conference. We did a site tour, and people from Richmond, from Birmingham, from Omaha, we show and tell what we're doing in our neighborhood. And these people all said we had no idea anybody was doing this in a suburban neighborhood. We had a big dinner, had a great time. It was so much fun to show and tell. This is another 1 acre property several blocks away. This first picture shows the early going on this 1 acre property. It's a long, narrow rectangle. And over the years, we've had work parties, took out all the blackberries and the English ivy and put in a big garden. I've had celebrations there, harvest festival, educational sessions. A little bit under the radar, this place now is kind of a micro eco village. There are several small outbuildings that people live in. So it's a kind of a preview of making a more purposeful use of suburban space. It's a little bit of an eco village, people helping each other out. Another real important asset we have in our neighborhood is our neighborhood association. Eugene, the city, has a neighborhood program. There's 25 neighborhoods, and most of them have a neighborhood association. They meet every month and they address the issues of the neighborhood. So I've been on the board here in River Road for 15 of the last 20 years. But the neighborhood association has a standing in the community, and it's a platform for putting out information and addressing the needs of the neighborhood. So we've had information go out to the neighborhood about permaculture, this particular newsletter, and we've had meetings about resilience and preparedness. So when a person is involved with a neighborhood association, they can help create the agenda. And if permaculture and creating a preferred future is part of the agenda, that can go out to the wider neighborhood. This image here shows the eastern boundary of our neighborhood. This is the Willamette River. It runs north and south, and it drains towards the north to the Columbia River there at Portland. But our neighborhood is just to the west of the Willamette River. And this is public space along the river. It's a greenway. And what we've been doing in the greenway is people in the neighborhood have been adopting sections of the greenway to restore habitat, which is what's happening right here. We're doing some replanting. We saw an earlier picture of Razor Park. I've mentioned the Filbert Grove. There was a 65-tree Filbert Grove in the greenway that was all overgrown with blackberries and English ivy. And in coordination with the city, we've cleaned up the Filbert Grove. Anybody can go to the Filbert Grove and they can collect nuts. And it is a emerging new important community resource for local food production. So the city doesn't have the time or the budget to take care of public property as that public property deserves. So in an ideal future, people in the community are stepping up and they're taking more responsibility for looking after the public space. We need to be doing a whole lot more of that in all kinds of different ways. Another asset that almost any neighborhood has are faith groups, churches, mosque, synagogue. These are all entities that have a care for the neighborhood, that already have a level of cohesion that should suggest that faith groups would do well to be more in the leaders in the community for bringing about a preferred future. Recall the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions. And certainly many faith groups are very active in the community and doing important work. We all need to step up and pick up the pace. This is a Lutheran church here in my neighborhood, and they have a fair amount of property. And this is a new garden being constructed here at a Lutheran church a few blocks away. So what are some of the attributes of creating a preferred future? Again, it's how we prioritize our time and money, and who are the allies and assets, and faith groups. I'd like to see, once again, this is part of a wish list, a River Road Earth Core. How can we make better use of what we already have here in our neighborhood? And of course, underline this one a couple of times, is how we prioritize our own time and money. So we invest in goods and services, as mentioned, that move us closer to those goals. A little bit more particular, imagine you have a home and you think about maybe remodeling the kitchen or buying a new car or maybe going for a cruise. Of course, those can be nice things to do, but given the state of the world, it really makes a lot of sense to invest in our homes, in our neighborhoods, our communities where we live. So what I'm showing in this graphic right here is, say, a $25,000 remodel could buy a rainwater catchment system. It could pay for an edible landscape. It could help pay for taking out the driveway, a heat pump. There's lots of products and services that are positive. I personally can be very critical about our economic system. And on my radio broadcasts and my podcasts, I go into great detail about capitalism and the consumer culture. But the fact is that this affluence has brought to us lots of tools, lots of allies and assets that we can make use of in a positive way to help bring about the kind of world I think we all deserve. With this future ideal, education just couldn't be more important. A term I would use would be economic, social, environmental, and lifestyle literacy. What are the kinds of knowledge that's available that we could all make more use of to help move us towards a preferred future? That's what I call literacy. What's the reality about what our economic system does? What is the reality of the potentials that we all have available for bringing out the best and positive human potential? That's what I think of when I consider the term literacy. Literacy could start out in grade school, middle school, high school, into continuing education, for people to share the knowledge that already exists about bringing about a preferred future. Permaculture is certainly an important tool and an asset for designing systems that fit within the boundaries of the natural world. Permaculture has values and principles that are very useful for designing at many scales, from the backyard to the neighborhood. The principles of permaculture could be useful for designing an economic system, working with nature, designing for multiple benefits. It's social, it's economic, even could be political, but permaculture is an enormous asset for helping to design and bring about a preferred future. Moving towards a sustainable economy and society would mean making all kinds of new relationships to build common cause. I've touched on this. Of course, here's the communities of faith. Think of the entities in the community or in the neighborhood, the Red Cross, the PTA, Scouts, all kinds of nonprofit organizations. They all exist to help bring about a healthier community. They all should be allies working together. And considering the types of literacy we just touched on, history is going to move us in directions where we're going to be making new types of connections, allies, and assets with these entities in our communities, that the potentials there, the need for making those connections and that common cause is only going to increase. This is a really nice little graphic I came up with talking about allies, assets, and actions. When we have people to work with, we can recognize more assets that could be useful. And when we act, we take action that creates more allies, more people become involved, and it creates new assets. This is something of a virtual triangle right here, because any one of these two working together increase the other in every combination that you can imagine. I mentioned the neighborhood association. Moving into the future, I see neighborhood associations as taking on a lot more responsibility, a lot more administration, a lot more initiative, perhaps even a little bit more executive power in our neighborhoods. The cities with decreasing budgets have less and less time and capacity for the kinds of actions that need to take place in our neighborhoods. If you're watching on YouTube, you might want to pause here and take a closer look at the text I've come up with here. But already here in our neighborhood association, and I would imagine others, most neighborhood associations have different committees. And those committees that exist now are kind of a preview of issues and concerns that are probably only going to become more important and more urgent as time goes on, like land use and housing, the environment, public safety. So this is a really important asset that we have, our neighborhood associations. And if your neighborhood doesn't have one, then you can just create one. Would take effort, but the future is going to require people taking a lot more initiative, a lot more responsibility where they live. And of course, many neighborhoods have a recreation center, as mentioned before, a community center. Typically, these locations have facilities and they have an invitation for people in the community, in the neighborhood, to make use of those facilities. People can take initiative, go to the rec center and say, hey, I'd like to use a meeting room and we'd like to have a series of presentations about creating a preferred future. We want to talk about permaculture, food production, solar energy, what are the social skills. The community center will probably say, okay, well, let's write this down. We have a program, we can add you to the listing of classes and the types of offerings from the neighborhood association that they might put out in the mail, of the opportunities there in the neighborhood. People can come to your classes and learn all about this. So the community center is there to enrich the life of the neighborhood, and we could be using community centers in a much more effective way. Again, we saw this image here. We've already made some use of our neighborhood association. We need to be doing more of that, as we did with the permaculture convergence. And moving into the future is going to take a lot more interaction of the public to participate in helping to design a direction for where their communities are going to be moving as time goes on. And again, the idea of literacy is just so important. We had a big effort here over a period of years to create a new neighborhood plan for our neighborhood. There was hundreds and hundreds of hours of staff time and thousands of hours of public participation. And a lot of the content is good. We do have a fair amount of preparedness and resilience and sort of sustainability content in our neighborhood plan, but it doesn't have any teeth in it. It's just nice ideas. A new neighborhood plan that's not confined by the thinking that our future is just going to be something of a reasonable extension of today. The future is going to be different. It needs to be different because we can't afford to keep pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and designing our civilization on behalf of automobiles. So neighborhood meetings, literate neighborhood meetings are an important part of the future almost everywhere. This is part of one of our meetings. This would be a particular interest group in a subsection of creating a neighborhood plan. But if you could just imagine if these people were talking about, say, for example, improving food production in the neighborhood, just imagine this meeting is how can we identify what locations in the neighborhood we can put in gardens, and how could we engage high school and middle school students in helping turn those places into gardens. That's what this conversation could be about, or all kinds of other conversations about eco-villages and permaculture. Almost every city has a department that has to do with preparedness and disaster. Of course, things happen, disasters happen, and of course, they seem to be happening more frequently all over the country with wildfires and floods, unusual weather events, the sea level rising. So preparedness is a huge issue, and all cities have preparedness and disaster types of contingencies. Preparedness is an opportunity to move people a little further along and towards resilience and sustainability, because when we reduce our eco footprints, we start taking care of more basic needs closer to where we live, like food, water, energy, building community. Those actions all make us more prepared. They all can make us more resilient, and they can be part of the transition and movement towards a more sustainable society. So what that comes down to is, we know neighborhood watch, emergency preparedness, a city program in many locations called Mapping Your Neighborhood, along with the mainstream straight ahead preparedness content of these programs. They can add content and actions that relate to permaculture, rainwater catchment, food production, building more community and cohesion in our neighborhoods. That can be added on to their existing curriculum to take these existing ideas further in a direction that empowers people and helps make our neighborhoods both more prepared but more resilient, and move us further along towards sustainability. This is something of a new idea that I've been kind of incubating in my mind for a while. There's a growing interest, I think, in a lot of places in the country about elderly people aging in place. This organization here, Villages in Clark County. Clark County is in Washington State, and it's across the Columbia River from Portland. And I'm sure there are other locations that are doing the same thing as Clark County. This is just one location I'm aware of. I get their newsletters, but this is to create somewhat virtual villages to help support people aging at home instead of going to some facility. And of course, that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. So what the villages do is, one of their important offerings is that they provide a directory to elderly people that they can refer to when they need help with mowing the yard or making a repair on their house or some type of healthcare, any kinds of needs that people have. This directory is of vetted business people who can offer those services, and they're reliable and they're safe and they do a good job. And this helps people take the mystery and the difficulty out of aging in place. Well, I think this model of a directory to supply and provide needs by reliable, safe people, this could be expanded to beyond just elderly people. This could apply to the entire neighborhood, the entire community. Imagine that every neighborhood had a directory of people in the neighborhood who, the architects, the doctors, the the skills that provide for people's needs in the neighborhood, so people don't have to go so far to satisfy those needs. A more walkable neighborhood, a more accessible kind of neighborhood. So this model of villages, Clark County neighborhoods could set something up like this in the neighborhood. That's and it could be that the neighborhood association takes a lead in working on this. But if you're doing YouTube, you can take a closer look. You can go to the website of Villages Clark County and you can learn more about this idea. And then you can imagine, how could we sort of fit this model into our neighborhood as well. So I mentioned faith groups before. Faith groups have an appreciable level of existing cohesion. And of course, they have a belief system, as mentioned, with the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions. The faith groups could be an important point of departure for working on this virtual village model. The faith groups could start out as sort of like the little beginning prototype of this sort of organization, that people within the congregation could look more to each other for satisfying their needs, taking care of their needs, to support the elderly, to maybe support somebody who wants to turn their property into a permaculture paradise. What if the skills needed for making those kinds of actions was more accessible and was with people who were already something of a known quality? I again think that faith groups can be an enormous asset to the wider community. And say a faith group puts together this kind of directory, this kind of information, they could perhaps make it available to the wider community. They could perhaps coordinate with other faith groups nearby to make a larger network. So I really like the thought of faith groups. And here's another wonderful idea, and bits and pieces of this happening here and there. I know of an organization in Syracuse, New York, called the Onondaga Earth Corps. And what the Onondaga Earth Corps is already doing, I would love to have something like this going on in my neighborhood. Say that with the entities in the neighborhood, we coordinated with the schools, the faith communities, businesses, the neighborhood association. Imagine we had a River Road Earth Corps where we had kids who lived in the neighborhood who were part of this Earth Corps, and they could be helpful in turning front yards into gardens. They could be helpful for the elderly, could be helpful in environmental restoration, building community. These bullet points right here are straight from the Onondaga Earth Corps. Help youth understand the relationships between people and the natural world, train youth for future jobs and careers and skills that are relevant to a different kind of a future. So I really like the idea of a neighborhood Earth Corps. And here in Syracuse, they already having an Earth Corps and are a great model to build on. So transportation is a huge, big part of our lives. Our lives are based mostly in regard to transportation on mobility. because we don't live close to where we need to take care of our needs. That's why there's so many cars, because our civilization is based on mobility rather than accessibility. Accessibility, of course, is where the things you need are accessible. They're closer to where you live. And in the realm of urban design, there's an increasing recognition that mobility is not the most ideal place to invest our time and money to continue to indulge automobiles. There's pushback on cars in more and more cities around the country, partly because of COVID-19, partly because cars and trucks are a big part of climate change. But it's exciting to start seeing more discussion about neighborhoods that are more walkable and creating alternatives to the automobile. That has to be a huge part of a preferred future. These images here just show some examples of bicycle infrastructure in different cities. The idea of taking automobile space and taking some of that space and making it a safe place for people to ride bikes. A lot more people would ride bicycles if they felt safe riding a bicycle. I don't blame some people for not riding a bike, seeing what some cities look like. I wouldn't want to ride a bike in some of those places either, but bicycles are a very important part, and increasingly important part of the transportation mix, even in places like New York City, not to mention Paris, France, or Barcelona, Spain. This is a graphic I made. River Road is the main road that goes through my neighborhood. It's as it's currently configured, there's 5 lanes. There's 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, and then there's a turn lane, and then there's a bike lane that's identified with a painted line for the bike lane. Well, in my ideal of moving towards a preferred future, we're going to reconfigure River Road. We're going to enlarge the bike lanes. We're going to take some of the space out of the existing model, and we're going to redesignate some of that space for bicycles, 2 bicycle lanes going in each direction, because as many of us know, electric bicycles are just becoming more and more popular constantly. So there needs to be a lane for conventional bicycles, and there needs to be a lane for electric bicycles. And then we would have a cement curb to separate the bike lane from the bus lane. Here in Eugene, we have what's called bus rapid transit. And that's a bus that has a priority. It's a step up from a conventional bus. It goes more frequently. It might have part of its route. It might have its own dedicated route that cars don't go into. It could get a jump on traffic lights. You can do a search on bus rapid transit. Some call it a light rail on the cheap, because it has a lot of those kinds of attributes. So in my improved version of River Road, we have EMX is the name of our local bus rapid transit. So there's a lane for EMX. There's 1 lane for cars going in both directions. I'm sure a highway engineer would look at this and have some comments, but moving more in this kind of a direction is very much called for. Certainly, there would need to be refinements made in this kind of a plan, but the idea to use more of that transportation infrastructure for alternatives to the automobiles, that's the primary message here. And another important part of moving our neighborhoods into the future, of course, is economic development. These pictures here show a location in Portland, Oregon that I've visited is called Our 42nd Avenue in Portland, Oregon. And it's a small, modest scale economic development corporation in Portland. And it's a nonprofit. It's financed by tax increment financing. And I'm sure that they have a website. You can look up more. You can find out more about our 42nd Avenue. But its purpose is to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood. And business is an essential part of quality of life. What are the businesses? And do they employ local people? What kind of products and services do they provide? Our 42nd is very sensitive to be careful about what kinds of new economic developments occur in the Cully neighborhood. This is the Cully neighborhood in Portland. And of course, they're sensitive to the future with their economic development. The thought also important, how is this type of business going to fit into a different type of future as well? Businesses that are locally owned and employ local people. I wish we had something like this in my neighborhood. Why not? Of course, it would take a lot of work to put something like this together, but the future calls for that kind of work, that kind of effort. Coming up on the home stretch, we've got about 4 or 5 more pictures to look at, and they're all good ones too. This image, block planning. Block planning is a land use tool. The city of Eugene recognizes block planning. Other cities might have a different term for this approach to reusing existing urban space and infrastructure. But these images here are idealized. I wish I could say that this was all happening in Eugene, but this is an idealized before and after with block planning. Basically, a block plan allows the people who live on the block and the property owners to come up with a plan about how they would like to rework, reimagine what that block looks like. This doesn't mean that city regulations go away, but what it does mean is that with a block plan, the city is more likely to say to those with the block plan, the city would say, these are the outcomes that we want. How are you going to deliver these outcomes? Instead of the normal relationship is the city says, this is what you're going to do. Go do this and we'll take a look at it. A block plan allows people on the block much more flexibility about how they could redevelop the block in terms of setbacks, in terms of landscaping, even in terms of traffic. This particular block could even narrow the street so that only emergency vehicles could go through here. The block plan could help the block transform space from automobile space to small business, to gardens, to new residential construction. So this is a wonderful example of how block planning could be an enormously important tool for how we rework our existing urban landscape. This could be, once again, my garage with a block plan and more accessible communities, more accessible neighborhoods. We don't need so many cars, so we can turn driveways and garages more into useful space because cars aren't as important as there used to be. So this kind of a scene before and after a block plan could help facilitate this type of transformation. There's a housing cooperative in Eugene called East Blair, and the co-op owns about 8 properties. and they can manage these properties in a coordinated way. So when I see East Blair, I see this illustrates many of the kinds of actions that a block plan could help facilitate. East Blair is not a block plan, but the land use the co-op maintains on those 8 properties simulates what a block plan could look like. And it simulates many of the social benefits that a block plan could deliver, because a block plan could increase the cohesion and the cooperation on that block. The co-op already is doing something like that from a slightly different direction, but with a similar result. For example, here at East Blair, which has about 50 residents, their kids live there, multi-age, it tends to be lower income. One of the amenities that's my favorite at East Blair is a tool room. You don't have to have your own tools for everything. The co-op has all these different types of tools that people can check out and they can use. You don't have to own all your own tools. The co-op has washers and dryers. You don't have to have your own washer and dryer. You can use the co-op's washer and dryer. You don't need to take so much space in your own personal living. You don't have to have the expense of buying your own washer and dryer. At East Blair, some people live in small townhouses and they don't have room for a garden at their townhouse. But elsewhere on the co-op, their backyards, their space where people from the townhouse can have a garden. Elsewhere on the co-op, the making better use of space is the reason for the block plan, or how the co-op manages that property in a more effective way. One of my favorite stories at East Blair, this picture right here, there's a lower than usual, a less than usual per capita use of automobiles at East Blair. So this beautiful space right here that has edible landscaping, there's picnic table, there's a fire pit. This is a great party location. I've been to parties here. This, where you see here, used to be a parking lot. East Blair decided we don't need that parking lot. Let's take it out and put that space to better use. And that's exactly what happened. Block planning, a more accessible neighborhood could enhance the movement of car space to better use. The co-op also has a community room, and they make the community room available to the rest of the neighborhood too for having meetings there. A really nice place. Lots of positive human events, community events have gone on. So East Blair, and we've had many site tours at East Blair as a show and tell, specifically to say this is what block planning can deliver, because there are so many examples of that right there at East Blair. This image here, imagine you're looking down at a neighborhood. Each one of these, this is about 6 or 7 houses here. There's about another 8 or 10 houses scattered around. This actually is a Google view of my part of the neighborhood. It's a little more detailed than the earlier views we had that I mentioned. This is my house right here. This is next door neighbor. This actually is where the driveway was taken out and a garden put in. So this image shows block planning. It shows permaculture. It shows a higher level of cohesion. It shows people moving from preparedness to resilience towards sustainability. It shows an engaged neighborhood association. There could have been work here by the neighborhood Earth Corps, all kinds of elements that we've touched on earlier in the presentation can come down to this could be the result. Of course, again, this is theoretical. This isn't all happening, but bits and pieces of this image already exist. I'd sure like to see more, but this is a permacultured suburban part of the neighborhood right here. The fences are gone. It's not a commune. People still have their private property, but imagine a much higher level of civic culture, a much higher level of community cohesion that goes into this, because in this future, people are going to be taking care of more of their basic needs closer to where they live. They're going to have smaller ecological footprints. They're going to be using their own time and money for helping to bring this about instead of buying the new car or the kitchen remodel. This is where people are focusing their time and energy. I love it. And there's another land use counterpart to the block planning and to reducing the eco footprints, and that is making better use of already impacted urban space. This is River Road right here. You can see the 5 lanes and the bike lanes. Recall, this is a mid-60s strip mall on River Road. This is maybe 7 or 8 blocks from where I live right here. It's just a little strip mall. There's a couple restaurants. There's a dog grooming. This is a bike shop right here. These are businesses, but they also have a huge parking lot. This is a photoshopped version of this picture here. You see this car here. That's the same car right here. A friend and I did a Photoshop on this strip mall, and we fit onto that parking lot mixed use redevelopment. The residential above the commercial, these could even be another couple stories high. It would need to be something that fit within what the neighborhood character, but the fact is we do need to increase the density of residential, and we need to have forms of residential opportunity that some would call the missing middle between the detached house and between the apartment complex. This type of redevelopment could also include more options between what are normally available. And of course, this redevelopment could be more affordable housing. Of course, it would take a lot of investment, which reminds me one point I missed about the economic development that's relevant right here. What if that economic development capacity included a way for people in the neighborhood to invest their money into the neighborhood? People could say, I've got $10,000, I've got $100,000. I'd like for this money to be invested in the neighborhood. They're not donating it. They want a return on that money, but they want that money to go into projects that help make the neighborhood a more green and resilient place to live. And people can even designate more or less how they want their particular money to be used in the neighborhood. But this doesn't exist really right now in any way that somebody like me could access in terms of having of money that could be helpful for an entrepreneur here in the neighborhood to start a business that could be helpful for the neighborhood, or start this kind of redevelopment that could add to the quality of life. Imagine the mixed use redevelopment, and we have the bus going here, we have the bike lanes. That could be a lot easier for the people who live here to access other services and other needs in the neighborhood. So let's just upscale that a little bit. This is also here in my neighborhood. This is a relatively large suburban strip mall. This is a big grocery store. There's a optometrist, there's a pet store, there's a tanning salon. My place where I do my banking is right up here, a community credit union. There's a Goodwill store. This is where I have my dental work done. But just imagine, instead of having this big parking lot, we rebuilt on that parking lot and turned this, I would say, something like a 4-acre parking lot into mixed use redevelopment, where we had residential, we had professional offices on the ground floor. This could be done ideally in a way that fits a constrained future. Maybe the apartments aren't so big. Maybe there's a car share. The apartments include a car share, and the community could come together and decide these are really the most important goods and services we don't have now in River Road. But if we're redeveloping with more people and more accessibility, these are the kinds of goods and services we need in the neighborhood. And this is River Road right here, I mentioned before, and the road continues going out another mile and you come to the urban growth boundary, and then you're out in the countryside. But there's lots of suburbia all out here. I live more to the south of this area, but imagine those bike lanes. The bus rapid transit could make this much more accessible to the people who live in the neighborhood, so we don't have to have so many cars. This would be a pretty big community investment right here. But if we had a way to channel our resources, our time and our energy to make our neighborhood a better place to live, maybe we could even take something on like this. This is the last picture. Conclusions, multiple benefits. Permaculture ideal is to design for multiple benefits. This kind of approach towards reimagining a neighborhood, taking on these kinds of projects that empower people, that are healthy for people and planet, all these kinds of benefits would make our neighborhood more resilient, more prepared, move us towards sustainability. This could be a huge boost for the local economy. Think of all the positive human potential that could be brought into play with this kind of a reimagining the neighborhood. All the different entities and assets in the community and the neighborhood could be activated. This could benefit the natural environment. We could do more to restore the parks and the open space we have in our neighborhood, reduce eco footprints, mitigate climate change, public health. Our air would be cleaner. There would be the aesthetic element as well. We would live in a more attractive place, positive human potential, community culture, again, new skills and empowerment, with the young people and the neighborhood Earth Core. So I am going to end the presentation there, and I invite you to visit my website, suburbanpermaculture.org, and I have lots of podcasts and links to other YouTube presentations that go into more detail, little tangents, from what you've seen here. So thanks for listening.